So as the country marks 30 years of democracy this year, a debate around how much we have managed to uphold human rights has been sparked. And this comes as we celebrate Human Rights Month, with the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development convening the National Conference to assess the progress and also chart a way forward in advancing human rights since 1994. But to unpack this further, we are joined by the Director General from the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, Mr. Doc Mashabane. Mr. Mashabane, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that the conference is set to take place from the 18th to the 20th of March. What are you hoping to achieve with the dialogue that comes out of this conference?
Good morning, Naledi, and good morning to your viewers. Thank you very much for having us here this morning to discuss about the conference, which indeed you have confirmed will be held from the 18th to the 20th of March, and is taking place during this Human Rights Month. The main objective really of the conference is to mark this significant milestone of 3 decades since the dawn of constitutional democracy in this country. As you know, all the years before that was celebrated as the Sharpeville Day due to the event that happened in the 60s, where many people were killed by the erstwhile apartheid government. So post-1994, this day then was declared a Human Rights Day, given generally the history of the country, that it was a history of colonialism, racial subjugation and apartheid in general. And the commitment of a democratic state was to uphold human rights and promote, respect and observation of human rights, generally throughout the years. So we thought it was very much important that we have this conference to make a reflection generally in broad terms and say, over 3 decades, what progress have we made in the promotion and observation of human rights in the country? So the main idea really is that after 3 days of discussions, government and different departments and government entities should be able to get recommendations on what should be done as we proceed and move forward to the next maybe 30 years again. How do we make sure that, the respect and the promotion of human rights is improved in the country?
Yeah, I'm trying to, while I speak to you, look up when last we actually had a study done in the country around constitutional awareness. And the last that I'm seeing is around findings coming out just before 2018, which is a considerable time ago, about 6 years ago. So one would hope that the department, for instance, over the years is continuing to monitor where we are with active citizenry and understanding what it is, and also understanding people having a good understanding of our Constitution. If you were around or, I suppose old enough to remember a lot of the early 90s in the country, you'd remember that little Constitution book was in so many homes, so many schools, so many institutions. You don't see that so much anymore. Where do we sit right now in constitutional awareness in the country?
Look, for years, since the Department of Constitutional Development was moved to the Department of Justice in 1999, part of the responsibility of the department has been constitutional awareness and human rights education. And indeed, I do remember that time, 1996, 1997, where after the Constitution was adopted as the final Constitution, there was a lot of, distribution of the constitutional material in different languages. And that continues to be done. It may well be that it has not been at that level. And what we seek to do as well is to get back to that point, to say there are the society keeps on changing. There are young people who may not have been there during that time. And you may have people who also may have lost those copies. But beyond that, you want to say, it doesn't end with having a copy of the Constitution at home, but how do we live it and how do we experience it? How does it get explained and how does it find resonance across government programs and government departments, starting from local government all the way to national government?
Yeah, because it seems that we have a shortage. I mean, this is now a study that I'm seeing that was again published in 2018. PMD essentially saying that in 2018, 51% of South Africans had heard and known about the South African Constitution. What does that mean when we then talk about a country that has serious challenges in creating access to justice, particularly for some of the most vulnerable in our community? And then, of course, what that means from a larger scale point of view, where the department then has to deal with equipping the nation with the resources, the infrastructure, the judges that we need for us to give people access to justice?
No, that's very important, and I think that kind of a study assists us to say this is where we build from. And I can tell you, just in the past 5 years, post-COVID, of course, a lot of human rights awareness campaigns have been done. And of course, we appreciate your involvement as well as media in different forms that you assist the way you can. And part of what that conference seeks to do as well is to say, to what extent do South Africans appreciate the Constitution and Chapter 2, which contains the Bill of Rights? Just the general knowledge of their constitutional and human rights. And so that from there, we develop a program that continues to say, it cannot just be about many imbeciles, but how do we drill down? That's why part of the program we run it with the Department of Basic Education as well, which is distribution of these copies of the constitutions in schools, but also, as you know, the Department of Education as well, in their life orientation, has included this program around human rights. And as we continue to do that, it's not only for students or high school learners, but it's across the board, different, stakeholders in society, different formations, religious, political, organized labor. It requires all of us as well to show an interest. We don't necessarily have a benchmark of other countries, the level, whether developed or underdeveloped, the level that they go to in terms of human rights awareness. But that remains a major commitment in the department that every ordinary South African must know about the Constitution and the human rights, because the future of our constitutional democracy depends on ordinary South Africans knowing about their rights, not only their rights, but also their responsibilities as well to build this democracy.
So I just want to bring one, and we've talked about access to justice as I think is an important one, because we can certainly talk about people understanding their human rights, understanding the Constitution, but once those are violated, they need to feel that your government has the capacity to deal with those violations. We understand, though, that the department and certainly our courts have been dealing with a massive shortage of judges. Am I correct in saying that we had 250 judges since 2010 and that number has not changed? Where are we now in capacitating ourselves and ensuring that those people who dole out justice are there and sufficient enough to do their work?
Look, access to justice, as you say, is a very critical and it's a fundamental right. But as you know from our judiciary, we don't only have judges. We have the lower judiciary, which is made up of the magistrates. Starting from the district court, you have district magistrates, then you have regional court magistrates, and ultimately then you have judges. And as you know, we have more than 800 courts of justice across the length and the breadth of this country, where ordinary South Africans, I think the last study that was done, the radius, the average radius to the nearest court for any South African is between 30 and 50 kilometers. And our desire is that one day we can reduce that by half, so that people who seek justice, they can easily, access the courts without having to travel long distances. So we have about 2,500 magistrates in the in the country, both regional and districts. And remember, that's where, cases start. And if you look at the jurisdiction of the regional courts, it can deal with serious matters. And then there are those that, of course, then will go to the High Court. But we don't necessarily have the crisis of saying, with the number of judges we have, justice is not dispensed on time. People have no access to justice because there is a shortage of judges. And indeed, of course, currently, there's a process that is led by the former Deputy Chief Justice of rationalization of courts that is going to give the Minister for Justice and Correctional Services a report on the number of judges that we have and the impact it has on access to justice. And obviously, it's going to make recommendations on where we should increase the number of judges, because you won't just take a simple straitjacket approach and say every province must have 500 judges or not. You have to look at the concentration. Gauteng has become the biggest province in the country in terms of population, followed by KZN. But then, Gauteng, in terms of the number of court cases at the high level, has the highest number of, of matters. The court roll is big. So those are the things that that task team that is led by the former Deputy Chief Justice is looking at, and is going to come back to advise the minister and the department in order for a decision to be taken and to know where to improve capacity. But generally, even with those numbers you have mentioned, we are still convinced that there is a fair enough access and South Africans still enjoy the right to access to justice, which entails many things, not only the numbers of the judicial officers and the numbers of court. We have a legal aid system in South Africa that provide free legal assistance to the indigent and those that qualify.
Yeah, that also isn't without its capacity issues. And of course, that committee that you're talking about set up in 2021, one would hope that we work quite timeously in getting the recommendations on how we start to capacitate our courts. I want to leave it here because we don't have a lot of time. Certainly over the past few years, we've seen what you could call a tug of war over our constitution, right? Many and prominent leaders as well in the country coming out to malign our constitution, saying that it is not in touch with the reality of South Africans. Some even having likened it to, Roman Dutch law, and that it doesn't speak to Africans and South Africans, even though globally it is lauded as one of the best documents ever written from a constitutional point of view. I mean, what do you say to that ongoing tug of war over whether our constitution speaks to us?
Look, that constitution was homegrown. It was not imposed from anywhere. It was not adopted in any capital in the world. It was discussed here in South Africa and agreed upon here by South Africans. There was no one who came from somewhere else, and it represented, it continues to, the aspiration of the majority of the people of this country. That constitution remains robust and resilient. That's why it has stood the test of time. These 3 decades of constitutional democracy is anchored solidly on the foundation of that constitution. I'm not saying it is perfect. There's no single constitution all over the world that is perfect. However, that constitution has been amended 18 times, and that tells you a story to take into account the evolving material conditions on the ground. They live the experience. That's why you'll remember last year we opened this discussion, and this discussion continues. We'll continue next week in the conference. There are proposals. There's a Constitutional Review Committee of Parliament which can receive any proposal on what South Africans, after 30 years, the rear mirror, as they say, is more clearer than the windshield. So we look back 30 years, we have a lived experience. At the time it was adopted, it was an ambitious and a bold statement into the future. Yeah. And it has brought us here. It is disingenuous to want to blame any problem on the Constitution. Okay. We can have our own weaknesses and failures, but it's not about the Constitution. But also it is in our hands. If there are areas that require strengthening in the Constitution, we should talk about it openly as a nation and do what is required to take us forward to the next 30 years.
Yeah, I think an important discussion. Thank you so much for speaking to us. We really, really do appreciate it. The conference takes place from the 18th to the 20th of March under the theme, 3 Decades of Respect for and Promotion of Human Rights.